Hey, John, I owe you a phone call. I haven't gotten back to you yet. Sorry about that.
Hey, no problem. I'm still figuring things out.
All good. Maybe we can touch base next week. I'm actually trying to head out of town. So maybe
Oh,
next,
good for you. Where are you headed?
up north, up
Oh, yeah.
Flathead area for
It's
a little
always good to
while.
get out of town every once in a while.
It's my husband's birthday, so I gotta go join
Oh,
him in some company. But are you feeling better?
I'm on this really super high-powered antibiotic. So I not only have the infection that takes energy, the pill takes energy. That's a real treat.
Well, try some of that probiotic yogurt. I think that does help when you're on an antibiotic.
I'll tell you what, I am totally open to anything. You would think there'd be something on the market you could eat, drink, and you could get energy back.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what
no,
is it?
I think the probiotic yogurts, if you get some yogurt and it'll have probiotic on the label, I think that actually does help kind of counter.
Wow.
It doesn't,
No, that's a good tip, Glenn. I appreciate it.
the
I'm sure
antibiotic still
my,
works, but it kind of helps you rebalance. That's what I've always heard. So give that a shot. But I hope you're feeling better. That's a
yeah.
bummer.
No, I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah, I just cannot do what I normally do.
Yeah. Yep. It's
Glad,
frustrating.
glad I've got helpers and a daughter at home.
Good.
Yeah, she did the
Good.
cooking last night.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so worked out well. So how you doing?
Fine. Just trying to keep the house cool enough at night to sleep. That's
Oh
always my
gosh.
summer challenge. And then the ongoing debate of should I get air conditioning, and it's too expensive. And so I have a
Okay.
very complicated fan setup. And yeah,
Yeah.
so that's all right.
When we first moved into this house in 97, it's a straight west and no trees, nothing. We've got a full blown view and we just it drove us out. And so we had to get AC
Yeah,
about 3 years later, and I'm really glad we did.
yeah,
And I just don't see it getting any cooler in the long run.
I know. I know. I don't either.
Do you have central heat in your house?
Yeah, so I think we can add it in, but it's still several thousand. Is what
Oh
my
yeah.
I need to look at it. It's expensive, but on the other hand, sometimes you just gotta sleep. We'll figure it out, but this too shall pass. All right, well, I'm gonna get this started. Claire, are we ready to go?
We are all ready to go whenever you're ready,
Oh,
Gwen.
It's Lisa. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries at all. Thank you.
Messing up my clerks. Okay. All right. Well, I will call this meeting to order. Good morning. This is the Budget and Finance Committee for the City of Missoula City Council. It's July 13th, 2022, and I will call us into order. We are still having virtual meetings for our committee meetings. If you want to join the meeting, you can go to the City of Missoula website and go to the meetings page, find this meeting, go to the agenda and click on the link to join the meeting to provide public comment. You can always leave us a voicemail also. Voicemail number is 406-552-6012, and you can email us. Email address is council@ci.missoula.mt.us. So Lisa, if you would do roll call, I would appreciate it.
I can do that. Stacy Anderson. Let's see, doesn't look like she's here yet. Mirta Becerra.
Present.
Daniel Carlino.
Present.
John Contos.
Here?
Jordan Hess. No Jordan yet.
It's gonna be a little late, I think.
Okay. Gwen Jones.
Present?
Kristen Jordan.
Present.
Mike Nugent.
Present.
Jennifer Savage.
Present.
Amber Sherrill.
Present.
Sandra Vasica. Heidi West. So at this time, it looks like we have 8 people present and 4 people absent.
Wonderful. So we have a quorum. We have minutes from June 29th, 2022 Budget and Finance Committee meeting to approve. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved, and I'll take public comment on items not on the agenda. I'm not seeing anyone in the attendee room. So we'll go forward with the meeting. All right, under committee business this morning, we've got 3 different items. The first item, 3.1, is the annual assessments for street maintenance district number 1. And we have City Clerk Marty Rabine here to present on that. Good morning, Marty.
Good morning, and thank you, council members. I am presenting the proposed assessments for street maintenance district number 1. My annual spiel is this. This started in 1909 as a sprinkling district to lessen dust in downtown Missoula. And over the years, it has evolved as state law has changed to street maintenance district number 1. The purpose of this district is to remove trash and recycling from the trash and recycling bins that are located throughout the downtown area in Missoula. And also it covers the cost for the street maintenance division of the city to perform extra street sweeping services over and above street sweeping that's provided as part of our general service to the city of Missoula. Downtown streets get swept much more frequently than other streets. So this, the city council has entered into a contract with the Downtown Business Improvement District. They actually do the rubbish and recycling service in the downtown. Their contract does not anticipate any increases this year. The street division came in super close to their estimate last year, and they're not proposing an increase. So when we do our true up from what we estimated last year and what we had actuals, our recommendation this year is to do a small push of a 0.14% increase from last fiscal year. That would mean assessments for this next fiscal year would be $135,733. The statutes require that City Council conducts a public hearing prior to levying these taxes. And the taxes need to be levied by the second Monday in August. So with our legal advertising requirements, we're recommending that you schedule a public hearing on August 8th and make a decision that evening to comply with statutes. And I'm here if you have any questions. Thanks.
All right. Any questions regarding this item? Then I will be looking for a motion. Ms. Cheryl.
I'm happy to make the recommended motion.
Alrighty, thank you. I'll call for public comment, but we have no one in the attending room. Any other questions or comments from council? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mirta Becerra,
Yes.
Daniel Carlino,
Yes.
John Contos,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Kristen Jordan,
Yes.
Mike Nugent,
Yes.
Jennifer Savage,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill.
Yes.
So that's unanimous for all 8 in attendance.
Great, thank you. That can go on the consent agenda. Thanks, Marty. All right, the next item on our agenda is 3.2, the contract for Baker Tilly Municipal Advisory Services. And Lee Griffin is here. There you are. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning, and thank you, Lee Griffin, City Finance Director. I'm here today to ask City Council to approve the Municipal Advisory Services Master Agreement with Baker Tilly. And with the Chair's permission, I'd like to speak to the item. Baker Tilly, thank you. Baker Tilly is a firm that we've been using for municipal advising services for quite a while now, and that encompasses quite a few activities, and they're really an invaluable resource and partner in much of the financing activities that the city has engaged in. They provide debt service advisory services, especially with larger and more complicated debts that we issue. We always pull them in to help us run through all of the numbers, make sure we're getting the best deal. Two other services that Baker Tilly provide are arbitrage services and continuing disclosure. And arbitrage is a very complicated IRS regulation. It's a calculation that needs to be made to ensure that we are, in fact, not making money off of the tax-exempt debt that we issue. So we have to do filings about every 5 years for each of those issuances. And then continuing disclosure is these very thick reports that get sent out to municipal. It's called EMMA, E-M-M-A. And for the life of me, I can't remember what that acronym stands for right now. But these are thorough reports for any and all bondholders and folks who might be interested in buying any of the City of Missoula's debt. So that needs to happen every handful of years or anytime something changes with all of the City of Missoula's debt. And it's something that we don't engage in ourselves because it requires a lot of capacity. So I feel fortunate that we've been able to work with Baker Tilly. Please let me know if anybody has any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Lee from council regarding this item? All right, seeing no questions, I need a motion. Yeah, Ms. Cheryl.
I'm happy to make the recommended motion, and I'm thankful that there are firms out there that provide this type of service because it's obviously really important for us as a municipality. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm seeing I'll call for public comment, but there's no one in the attending room. Any other questions or comments from council? Then we'll have a roll call vote.
All right. Okay. Daniel Carlino,
Yes.
John Contos.
Yes.
Sorry, my computer is a little laggy today. Bear with me, apologize. Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Kristen Jordan,
Yes.
Mike Nugent,
Yes.
Jennifer Savage,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
and I noticed Heidi West is here.
Here.
All right. Did you want to vote on this, or
You're muted, Heidi.
you're muted? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So that would be 9 yeses for unanimous for everyone in attendance.
Great, thank you. That can also go onto the consent agenda. Okay, so for the bulk of our committee meeting today, we are working on the executive budget. And we have 2 presentations today, Central Services and Public Works, Mobility and Infrastructure. And Lee, it looks like we're also setting the public hearing procedurally. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to get the public hearing motion. We'll get that set up today, queued up, so that August 15th, we open the public hearing. So it is a ways out, but we are getting our ducks in a row. So Central Services is listed as the first presentation. And it looks like Eric Hallstrom, our department head, is here to present. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you're able to see.
Yep.
the presentation.
Looks great.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Eric Hallstrom. I'm the city's Chief Operations Officer, and I'm happy to be here today to present the mayor's proposed budget for the Central Services Department. Towards the end of April, I was before you with a fairly comprehensive overview and budget update for our FY22 activities, and I'll try not to duplicate too much of that today, but there's some level of consistency in the types of projects we'll be talking about. I noted also a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing the mayor's FY22 and FY23 priorities that this is a relatively tight budget year. And, the proposed budget we have that is funded is primarily oriented towards inflationary pressures and those costs necessary to maintain our level of service. So you're not going to see too much today from us that feels very new. But the investments that we have proposed will have significant positive outcomes for the city nonetheless, and the city overall. And they are tied to the city's strategic plan and to the mayor's FY23 priorities, as we'll discuss a little bit later. Just as a reminder, the Central Services team works in a spirit of partnership with our colleagues to provide exceptional service and administrative and operational services. We help the city achieve its broader strategic goals through that support. We provide coordinated management of business tools and information, essentially those activities and technologies and systems that allow the city to function effectively. Structurally, the Central Services department has 5 divisions. And as I mentioned last time, some of our divisions have historically been sort of funded and managed as independent departments. And so in their own right. So for budgeting purposes, you'll oftentimes see our divisions broken out separately as fleet, facilities, finance, information technology, and legislative services, city clerk's office. I talked last time about our new strategic projects analysis and reporting team that is providing support and management for strategic projects that have citywide impact, and supporting other high priority strategic initiatives. And budgetarily, that SPAR team is part of the Central Services administrative budget. So when we talk about the Central Services admin budget, that's where that team lives. Our divisions provide really different but related services to city staff and leadership. And the goal in managing that department from my standpoint is to coordinate that service delivery and identify ways that we can find efficiencies, whether those are process, policy, or technology that benefit the city as a whole. Central Services, along with our colleagues in Human Resources, are closely associated with the city's strategic goals around organizational excellence. I talked, I think, at length last time about that work. Angela, our Chief Human Resources Officer, and I co-chair the Organizational Excellence Strategic Implementation Work Team. But I also want to stress, as I did last time, that Central Services really is actively involved in supporting the full span of the city's strategic work, from safety, where we're, in fact, later today in the City Operations and Public Safety Committee, we'll be discussing the police department's long-term service evaluation and space needs assessment. We're actively engaged in environmental quality, where we're helping develop a climate lens for decision-making, building meaningful plan around electric vehicle adoption, supporting upgrades recommended by our investment grade audit around energy use. So really, from soup to nuts, the Central Services Department is engaged in advancing the full strategic goals for the city. We also have our staff from Central Services Department representing us in a variety of the strategic information or implementation work teams, and contributing their expertise and knowledge of city business processes and operations to help us prioritize initiatives across the strategic spectrum here. So before I talk about the FY23 proposed budget specifics, I wanted to just take a moment to note a couple of aspects of the mayor's FY23 priorities that are particularly front and center as I talk about our budget for our proposed budget this year. First, the mayor clearly focused on addressing our structural imbalance and recognizing, and this budget does that, not just for FY23, but looking forward to future years where one-time resources like ARPA and CARES Act money are not necessarily available as frequently. They become more rare. We have fewer tools at our disposal to maintain or increase service levels as we were able to through the pandemic. And so this is a budget that really grapples with not just the next fiscal year, but a sustainable future for the city financially. Second, the mayor continues to prioritize the implementation of technology that will advance our collaboration, communication, and project management maturity. This involves developing clear strategies and plans for modernization of our systems and security, for advancing key system modernizations like financial services, our financial services system and our HR systems, and then advancing and are continuing the implementation of Project Blueprint. I'll talk a lot more in detail about Project Blueprint in a couple slides. I also note the implementation of our tools around collaboration are really also going to support and advance the mayor's priority around communication and improving our internal communications particularly. So that's an exciting piece, bonus from the implementation of our new systems. And we're also actively supporting a number of facilities and space planning projects across the city that are really critical for us to make long-term space management decisions in a strategic way. And so I guess with that introduction, I will move to more specific budget proposed budget for central services. As a starting point, this slide captures our budgetary units, staffing, and baseline operating budgets. You can see our groupings range from quite small to fairly small. We have 3 or so units with 3 staff. We have a couple of units with more than 10 staff. But collectively, our base budget for fiscal year 23 is slightly over $7 million with a staff of just under 50 employees. I think I showed a pie chart in April that kind of puts that in context, but that of this base budget of $7 million, roughly 4.4 million, or just under 2/3, is attributable to our personnel costs. So we are primarily driven by the cost of our staff, and about 1/3 of that is for our other operating budget. I'll also note that.
Oh, Eric, can I ask really quickly, under administration, it says including SPAR, SPAR. What does that mean?
Strategic Projects Analysis and Reporting.
Okay.
That is the small team that does project management, John Adams and Alicia Vanderheiden, that are supporting a couple of key citywide projects.
Okay, thanks.
I'll try to be less acronym heavy when I.
No, all good. And is it all right to periodically ask you questions as we go through? So
Absolutely.
Counselors, raise your hands if you do have questions. We'll try and complete each slide at a minimum before we pepper you, but
Excellent.
thanks.
So I think the only thing I was going to note on this slide is that this base budget this year is a little bit smaller than it was in FY22. It represents some effort by our staff to find ways to control costs or be more strategic. And I just want to emphasize that is an exercise that our directors go through, evaluating changes both in their circumstances and their needs, but also changes in the way that we could more effectively allocate our resources. It also represents, I think, the fact that at least a position or two in central services has been funded through one-time resources, which also means that your base will come down and you need to make a new request in the following fiscal year. So you'll see that coming here in just a moment. So our next slide here captures the new requests from Central Services Department. And for the most part, these requests, the funded requests, represent more or less limited to what's necessary to continue providing that current level of service, as I mentioned. We have several well-considered and requests to expand service, but in this budgetary environment, we've been very cautious about adding to our ongoing costs. And so that doesn't mean that those needs aren't real or that they are not good ideas, but we have prioritized continuity over expansion in this budget. I'll go through these fairly quickly. Some are pretty small and self-explanatory. As you can see, the clerk's office has increased costs for our dues for Montana League of Cities and Towns. We have an increase in postage. Information technology has a significant base increase of $278,843. The bulk of that request, just under $270,000 for that request, is for licenses, software licenses and software maintenance costs. There are also some funds in this base adjustment to cover an increase in rent, as well as on-call and overtime costs necessary to adequately staff and cover the city's needs. But the bulk of that is in licenses, both for our core business systems like O365, but also our GIS systems like Acela. For the central services administrative budget, that's the other account where we have a relatively significant request that has been funded in this proposal. We're carrying the budget here for our continued work around the implementation of Microsoft's Office 365 suite of applications and capabilities, oftentimes referred to as Project Blueprint. I will have a more detailed slide next to talk a little bit about where we're at on that journey. But this is characterized and are categorized as an expansion of service. And I think it's accurate that it will certainly expand our capabilities and the business tools available to city staff. But it's in some ways a continuation of our ongoing work that we've already made and investments that we've made in technology transformation over the last 2 years. It includes software licensing to manage that final transition to Zoom, from Zoom to Teams. As you'll note, we're on Zoom today, but that is coming to an end. It includes investments in our ability to do change management effectively, which a big part of technology change is not simply the acquisition of our systems, but ensuring that we can use them effectively. It includes continued support for the consultant-led implementation that we have ongoing right now with Witham Consulting, and also additional AI tools as they come online or introduced to the government community cloud. You'll sometimes hear us talk about the GCC, and that is where the Microsoft suite for public sector government clients lives. And sometimes the functionality comes there at a different pace than it comes to the private sector cloud. For facilities services, proposed budget funds 2 requests. One is a base increase that reflects increases in our costs for utilities, fuel, and contracted services, so pretty typical. We're also proposing to maintain our current level of service, our current level of staffing by continuing to support 1 additional position through ARPA this year. We've done that in the last 2 years. The nature of that work has probably changed somewhat from being primarily custodial with a focus on sanitation and really now is a broader range of facilities maintenance tasks and duties. But the reality in that need remains. The pandemic and some subsequent workplace evolution has really increased the demand for the services of our facilities team. And so we continue to fund that position in this budget. For fleet, we finally have fleet with a small increase to capture, I think, primarily their inflationary costs around fuel and utilities. I will note that the one division you don't see on here is finance, and I want to flag that it is possible that we'll have some small increases in our costs, annual cost of our audit, and maybe some software license costs that will necessitate a baseline adjustment for finance. So we will keep you posted on any changes that come through there. But at the moment, this does not include a base adjustment for the finance division. I'll just note sort of in the totals on this slide that, the increase in our ongoing general funded requests total about, I think, $326,000. And that represents roughly a 4.5% growth, which is really tracks what we would expect around inflation, and maybe in some cases a little bit lower than I might have expected. There is a portion, and then sort of an equal portion that's being funded in one-time resources that will be those are targeted towards the Project Blueprint work. My next slide, I'm going to talk in more detail about Blueprint. So if there are people who have questions about other aspects of the request at the moment, maybe this would be the slide to discuss that on. Otherwise, I'll move forward.
Any questions? I'm not seeing any raised hands. Just keep going. Eric.
All right. So our next slide really just, as I mentioned, shows you this journey that we've been on through Office 365 and what is now our Project Blueprint. You can see starting in calendar year 2021, long before I was a member of the team, we convened our steering team. We introduced 2-factor authentication that enhanced our security. We deployed this phase 1 communications and Office suite. Really, as many of you will think about that as the transition from Skype to Teams that many of us went through at that period. And then we did training and have been conducting ongoing, monitoring and evaluation of that transition. Moving into 22, where we have initiated phase 2 with our in bringing our consultant on board. We released the mini collaboration project, which is where our a number of sort of beta tests are ongoing to look at the utility of teams and the different tools that we can bring to bear and figure out how best to deploy those. And then you see stars, kind of you are here stars at our drafting governance and lifecycle management and develop the foundation for our intranet, which we are currently actively involved in. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's some exciting stuff here happening that is going to make experience for our employees I think radically different than their current use of, sort of an antiquated file folder structure, a more dynamic way to work together and to share information and materials. There's a lot of opportunity coming here. I'm sorry, I moved the slide. Got too excited. But then you see, as we move into FY23, or this is actually calendar year 23, we continue the build out of the site, the intranet site, continuing that training and change management, and then some of the real exciting stuff that will, the promise of kind of this transition is the introduction of automated workflow and automated processes, Power BI and other artificial intelligence tools that will allow us to sort of take the data that we produce and manage and turn that into usable tools like dashboards and other dynamic, up-to-date information systems that will allow managers and program leads, leaders across the city to make decisions in sort of a more effective way. So it's something that everybody's looking forward to, and is kind of the endpoint on this process for Project Blueprint and O365, and it's why it continues to be a significant investment for the city. Lastly, I wanted to talk about our CIP capital improvement project items. I've highlighted sort of the 4 big ones here. The federal building, in February, the council approved an interlocal agreement with Missoula County to structure how we will design and rehabilitate the federal building, doing that in a collaborative way. We included a contract with A&E Design to complete their first phase of the rehab as part of that referral, and the Board of County Commissioners subsequently approved that contract. It's just over $600,000, and so and that's on behalf of the city and the county. So the vast majority of the figure that's in our request and the CIP for this year is dedicated to our half of the rehabilitation design. There's also some smaller pieces in here that will allow us to bring a general contractor on to bridge the design and construction gap and hold costs down as we move into real work there. For IT and GIS, we have both replacement equipment, which is part of the regular IT equipment replacement schedule, as well as aerial photography for our GIS systems, significant investments and important investments. For finance division, we include, again, resources for financial system modernization. This was in the CIP for last year, but we were not able to move forward on that just due to sort of capacity constraints. But as you have heard, that system modernization for some of these key systems like our HR information system and our financial management system are part of the mayor's priorities. And we hope to move forward this year, and ideally we're hoping to move those in tandem so that we can sort of get the most bang for our buck out of those modernization projects. And then fleet has our largest CIP component, $4.3 million. As I mentioned in April, for FY22, we're not on track to spend that full amount, and that's largely due to the challenges that we've had in acquiring the types of vehicles that we need to purchase. So it's hard to see with clarity what we will see through fiscal year 23, but this represents our anticipated need based on our replacement schedules. And since some of these are very large dollar purchases, it's possible for us to actually move through quite a bit of that budget. It doesn't take very many $500,000 vehicles to fill up that full allotment. But the realities are it's been a challenge. And so I'm not entirely sure what to anticipate in terms of actual spend for FY23. I will note that Scott is not here today. He's on vacation. So we are going to have a CIP roundup presentation later in the budget process. And I will make sure that Scott is here in case there is an interest in talking in more detail about vehicle acquisition. And that core operating vehicle category, Scott's really the one to help us understand the challenges that he's had around procurement. The one thing I'll note, it's not on my list here, but you might see as currently in the CIP is money related to the municipal courtroom number 3. That is largely representative of the fact that we had come in significantly under budget. And I think we only have a couple items left for FY23, a couple change items to complete that project, but we don't anticipate spending much on that in the new fiscal year. My final slide is not a component of the Central Services Department, but I'm just including the Mayor's Office's budget requests as well in here. You can see, again, another small team with a base budget primarily driven by personnel costs, and one new request for FY23 that is geared towards the reality that some aspects of the city's goals are not totally within our control. And so in order to move forward on some of those priorities, it's necessary to get the legislature in Montana to also move forward and give us some flexibility, or work with our colleagues across the municipal space in the state to give us more tools to address the needs of our community. So it's simply just an investment in that of those resources, and those are proposed to be one-time dollars. With that, I am complete, and I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have.
Okay, great. We've got, let me go to questions here. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you, Eric, for that presentation. I'm just wondering, do we have
Actually,
any
hang on
idea?
a second. Can you take the slide down, Eric? And
Oh,
then-
yes, sure.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kristen. I'm
That's okay.
never quick on the uptake. There we go. Okay, back to you, Kristen.
No worries. Thank you. Eric, I'm just wondering, do we have any idea what types of lobbying activities and issues we want to focus on as a city yet?
I will actually defer this one to our Chief Administrative Officer. If Dale is here, I think he has probably the most solid understanding of where we're going to focus our efforts.
Good morning, Dale Bickle, CAO, and we'll have a lot of discussions related to the legislature coming up. But there are two big themes, I think, emerging in the legislature. One is land use. And there is a land use committee that the League of Cities and Towns, members of our city team and development community, MACO, all around the state have been working on some of those things. And they're trying to figure out a way to improve our processes. And land use in Montana is a little bit backwards in that we kind of do zoning through subdivision a lot of times. And so there is an interest in trying to fix that. So we'll see how that goes. And the other one is property taxes. Although CI 121 did not get onto the ballot in the general election here in November, it's going to be a major theme in the legislature. I think property tax reform is, the mayor says it all the time. We need it desperately. But what that outcome is going to look like is going to be is unknown, and so we really need to be at that table.
Yeah. I can add also, we typically meet with some of the legislatures in December, I think, prior to the session starting. Some counselors do, or all council. I'm not quite sure how we've done it in the past, but we try and touch base with them. But during the legislative session, we get weekly updates from the mayor's office and are tracking certain bills. It is fast and furious, and it's sometimes we try and message on certain of them, but there's a lot.
May I have a follow-up?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, is there any plan to start advocating for a local option sales tax within that general tax reform initiative?
Yes, for sure. We've, been even discussions with that with the League of Cities and Towns and some other cities. So I think we will continue. We've been doing that. My first legislature working for local government was in 2001, and we talked about it then. So that kind of, that's it's a tough road, but it would be a huge benefit for our community.
Yeah. Okay. Next, we have Ms. Cheryl.
My line of questioning, I guess, is on the lobbyist as well. So I'm just, obviously, as you said, Gwen, the bills come fast and furious. So part of it is an effort to be monitoring bills that would affect us as a municipality negatively, but also actively advocating for things we want with our local legislators and, just through the lobbyist to the broader legislature. I guess I'm curious with the amount, Eric, that we have Dale, that we have allocated for that. Will we have one full-time lobbyist in that? Like how much time will we be able to, for lack of a better word, purchase with that amount? It seems maybe a little low, I guess, but maybe not for just the time they're in session.
Yeah, this amount gives us the same level of support that we've had in prior sessions. So it's actually a lobbying team. We have a lead. In the past, we've had a lead lobbyist, and they're actually supported by a team, and also we're close partners with the League of Cities and Towns. So we increased this based on that, assuming some inflationary style pressures, but it is a similar amount that we've budgeted that in the prior years.
Thanks.
Or prior sessions, I should say.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Daniel.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work with our constituents to let them understand the proposed tax increase. And I'm looking for more details on how all the different items are being spent. And I was curious if there's a detailed expenditure report that we could see or expected expenditures for fiscal year 2023. It seems like typically we don't see those until like they come up on claims or after the money's spent. But I'm wondering if we could just get like a line by line, how the money's planning on being spent, where it's going to, who's going to be paid, things like that. Do we have like a detailed expenditure report for that for central services?
So Dale and Lee, I don't know if you want to respond to that or
I'll just take a shot at with underneath the numbers that I've talked about today, there is more detail, so for instance, we could talk a little bit about, the exact amount we anticipate for that GIS, Acela, ESRI licenses. And so, I'd be more than happy to spend a little time with you on some of the breakdowns. In some categories, we don't, for instance, I have a budget for professional development or training that I don't know necessarily what specific training items might fall into that budget in FY23. So in that regard, I wouldn't be able to talk in detail about which, what will it be spent on, or what will the final vendor be. That would be part of our administration of the budget once we have direction that, this is the appropriate amount. But for other things, especially for those required and ongoing costs, we know pretty specifically what to anticipate and how much we will spend. So the places where I have a lot more detail would be in the IT license cost items, and also for the give you more detail on the breakdown of the project blueprint collection of of proposals. As I mentioned, there's $15,000 in Zoom licenses so that we can manage through a couple months of this transitional period. A certain amount of that, I think 100,000 is dedicated to consultants, but we have also some anticipated budget in there for things like G5 licenses, which are a new, license that gives us additional capability that goes well beyond this G3 licenses that we use right now. We don't know the final number there. We have a $75,000 estimate that reflects the work of our business management team and IT direct Cage and our IT shop to kind of identify what we anticipate the best guess for some of those costs, but we won't always know until we're actually able to get out for bid what the specific number is going to be, and maybe even who the vendor we ultimately will select will be. So and there are some places where I can get into more detail, and I think it'd probably be more productive if you wanted to have a conversation offline to talk about some of those specific. There are other places where I won't be able to get into that level of detail at this point.
Thanks, Eric. Dale, did you have more information on this?
Yeah, and I think just even outside of central services, I think what Eric said is correct. I think that it is, these budget amounts and these specific line items are based on, years of experience in these departments. And you can look at the line item detail of what is expected in the FY23 budget on the website. So there is a link, our FY23 budget, by line, by office supplies, by professional services. If you want to see the detail of what's in office supplies, for example, the best thing to do is request the detail from the specific department from a prior year. And you'll get, some of the, and it's a lot. If we printed out our GL detail, it would be literally millions of pages. So, so I think, looking at the areas where you think that something is, I would just like to know more about, the finance professional services, and they could provide a detail. They could, and then any questions in those things, because those are the items we typically, do somewhere. We have to have the audit every year, and all of those things. And so those are that's how that budget is established. And anything new, you see in these new requests.
Great, thanks. Did you have a follow-up, Daniel? No?
Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that explanation. I guess I'm trying to request, as much detail as possible for not only the council, but for the public. Like how Dale mentioned with operating supplies, it'd be great if we could at least see what operating supplies that we know that we're planning on buying. And even if it's just estimated costs, I think that would be really helpful to transparency for the public and for council to help make an informed decision. Just because, when some things are like $400,000 for operating supplies, that's pretty vague. And I guess I'm trying to, maybe I'll do this in the email, but I'm trying to request as much detail as possible for all those different things for every department. And I get that might be a lot of pages, but I think it would be helpful to the public transparency and people being able to know exactly where their tax money is being spent, or at least have a more detailed idea of where it's being spent, and then they might feel better about a tax increase. And I would certainly feel better about voting on the budget if we had a little bit more detail, but I will try and follow up with you guys. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I think and thanks for those questions and answers. I think it's going to be a very interesting budget session this year. We do have this structural deficit, and frankly, if we look at revenue that comes in, and then we look at just, for example, our labor costs and our labor contracts to pay people to work for the city with reasonable cost of living increases, that right there is the tax increase in my mind. That's the great bulk and majority of it. It's not going to be in the little details. It's going to be in the big picture. So I would just put that out there as something to think on as we go through this process. There was another hand raised, but it is now down. So all of their questions must have been answered. Okay. Any other questions for Eric on central services? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next item, which is Public Works, I believe. Yes, Public Works, Mobility and Infrastructure. All right, well, thank you. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Oh, and Mayor Thanks, Eric. Okay, Ms. Becerra, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to let you know that I wasn't called for a vote on the previous item. So I just wanted to say that I vote yes. Just wanted that for the record.
Okay, thanks. That's on 3.2, the Baker Tilly Municipal Advisory Services. Lisa, did you catch that there?
I did, Mirta. I apologize. I was having some computer problems. I'll go ahead and make sure that that gets noted. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. Thanks.
Thanks. All right. We are organized. Excellent. Okay, so moving on to Public Works, Mobility and Infrastructure, and we have an hour and a half scheduled for this one. So get your coffee. All right. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the budget for Public Works and Mobility. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of our budget and how those funds get used to carry out our council policy and direction, strategic goals for the city. Allison Siegel and I will make this presentation. Allison's our business finance manager for Public Works and Mobility, and I serve as the director. We do have a lot to cover. I will pause at a couple of key points to take questions, and I will do my best to also watch for hands. So if you have something along the way, put your hand up. I'll try to catch that. And then I have staff available on the call as well if we have more detailed questions. And as Dale said, there's a lot of information available on the website for additional information and detail. I just wanted to show you that real quick. On the Missoula preliminary budget website, there is a very long list of detailed information, and a lot of this includes all of the Public Works new requests and capital improvement projects in detail. So if there's anything that you want to dive into more detail on, we're happy to do that today. And you can also do that on your own to find all of that information. So here we go. So Public Works is really about basic stuff like clean water and safe streets, but also complex stuff like keeping nutrients out of our river. We provide the infrastructure and services that support a successful community. And our mission is crafted around that. In March, we took a look at how Public Works and Mobility supports the citywide strategic plan. We did a strategic compass, which was a one-day retreat with our key leaders, supervisors, managers, and staff to really line out some specific actions that we'll take over the next 12 to 18 months to help carry out that plan. And we developed some guiding principles for how we want to operate and some purpose statements for each division, which you'll see later in the presentation.
You might have to share your screen, Jeremy. Sorry.
Presentation. Jeremy, are we supposed to be?
I'm sorry.
I didn't know if you were just talking to us. We're so used to just clicking right into a PowerPoint, but you can also just talk to us, however. Okay, here we go.
I'm sorry, I thought I was sharing my screen.
Oh, that's all good. Okay.
This is what you missed.
Okay.
Our mission statement and our strategic compass. So these are the guiding principles that we developed for Public Works and Mobility, and it's all based on the work that we've done around a strategic plan for the city. So we're making sure that we're well aligned with the things that we want to do as a greater city and all departments together.
Great.
Okay, so our strategic compass is built on those 4 strategic pillars that are outlined in the mayor's budget presentation. This really means we're investing in the people, equipment, and technology that we need to ensure reliable and resilient services. We're working to make our process and our regulations more efficient and designed to get the outcomes that we want. We're providing essential services for safe, healthy living and working environments and safe travel on local streets. And we're working to maintain and improve our infrastructure systems, which provide water, sewer, stormwater, and transportation services to our citizens. Public Works is made up of 5 divisions, about 173 people. We're actually down about 3 people from last year. We were at 173. This really largely reflects the tight labor market that we're in. And I think we've done remarkably well in keeping our department well staffed, but it's a constant battle. So our 5 divisions are administration, planning and engineering, streets operations and maintenance, utility operations and maintenance, and the city cemetery. And we'll talk about each one of those divisions as we go through the presentation. Our budget in public works and mobility is just over $91 million, including capital projects, which makes up about 52% of that budget. The primary operating revenues come from charges for services. These are rates. These are the utility rates that we charge. That's about 35% of our budget. Property assessments through the road district, which is about 8%. And of note, 73% of our operating revenue, not including the capital projects, comes from charges for services, not from property taxes. The capital revenues are from things like grants and federal funding. We also use bonds and loan to finance large capital projects that span multiple years. And you'll see that as debt service in the budget. We also have revenues from things like development fees, impact fees, or sewer and water development fees, and other sources like the Montana Department of Transportation or the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, or direct developer contributions to projects. A few changes from the FY22 budget, which was around $80 million. We pretty significantly increased our CIP, our capital projects, through ARPA and state revolving loan funding. And we also have shifted the engineering budget from general fund to road district. And this is kind of a final step in the realignment that we did several years ago when we moved engineering back to public works. So the way that this revenue gets spent, these expenditures reflect the mayor's budget direction. Our proposed budget this year maintains current staffing levels and programs. The increases are for inflation and for the pay plan. We really are thinking about the need to focus on employees to make sure that we have the people that we need in order to carry out all of the important work and strategic goals that the council and the mayor have. This doesn't mean that we don't need to grow as our capacity as Missoula grows. Some of the things that aren't addressed in this budget are things like transition planning for retirements. We're seeing a lot of more senior staff starting to retire, and it's really important that we have the opportunity to transition that knowledge before they leave. So we've proposed some opportunities to do some double bunking where we have people hired before somebody leaves and we can transfer some of that knowledge. But with tight budgets, so that's hard to do. So some of that's not happening. We're also still really behind on street maintenance. We're not keeping up with the needs and underspending on that maintenance. And that's going to result in bigger problems later when we're not able to do that preventative maintenance. With water main replacements, we've really been able to ramp up our program, but we're still not quite at our target of 1% of water lines every year, which is sort of a 100-year replacement plan. So leaks continue to be a major source of power consumption and cost to our system that we're not fully addressing yet, but we are making progress. And in the wastewater utility, we're not catching up with sewer main replacement to the same degree we're working on water. So we're concerned that we've got a lot of pipes that are kind of at that age of 100 years. A lot of them are clay pipes. And so those are concerns that we're going to be looking at in the future that aren't really addressed in this budget. In wastewater, we have had low rates for a long time. We are the lowest in the state, and we made some changes last year to try to catch up with that. Inflation kind of ate up all of those increases, and so it's likely we're going to have to look at another rate increase in wastewater to continue to keep up.
Jeremy, we're still on the department budget slide. Is that where you want to be, or?
I am, yeah, I'm on expenditures.
Okay, all right,
So,
very good. Just want to make sure. Okay.
Thank you. So I'll just give you a couple highlights on the slide you're seeing here. Capital improvement plan makes up about 53%. That's $47.7 million. Those are approved and funded projects in this budget. But recognize that will span multiple fiscal years. We won't be able to carry out all of that work in one fiscal year. So these are large capital projects. They take multiple years to do the engineering and then construct. And so that will take some time. We are leveraging the grant funding from ARPA and also state revolving fund loans, and that debt service will show up in our next fiscal year budget. So that'll be in fiscal year 24 that we'll see that debt service. And that's a good strategy because these are long-term investments. These are things that will last 30, 40, 50 years. And that cost can be spread out over that time. And the state revolving loan fund in particular gives us very good interest rates to do that. We are paying attention to our pro formas and making sure that we have the debt coverage ratios that we want to see. We target 125% debt coverage in our funds. And we are also targeting a fund balance reserve of 7% to make sure that we have good contingencies and coverage for our debt. Personnel makes up about 19% of the budget. That's about 17.6 million. Debt service is at 11%. You can see that that's about $10 million, both for capital and also included in that is the water acquisition. And then services is the next largest category at about $6 million. This is contractors and consultants that we hire to help us carry out the program. So by division, the administration division supports the rest of the department with business and financial management services, communications, safety and risk management, and ensures high quality customer service. Administration is 18 staff members. Support all 5 divisions, 170 employees in 5 different office locations. Customer service for about 27,000 utility customers, and we support 5 public boards and committees. A couple of highlights from FY22. Just a reminder, the legend that you see there is kind of the similar legend from our strategic plan update. Check mark being complete. The little green road is making progress. It's on track. The yellow caution sign, there are some risks involved, and the red triangle is a significant risk or delay for moving forward. So in administration, we really focused on customer services and public outreach. Recruitment and retention has gone well this year. We've done some good work around process and creating some career ladders. What's really at risk is that transition planning and being able to transition new folks as people retire with budget constraints. We also did some good work with our space needs. We completed a remodel over in the water building on Broadway, which allowed us to move engineering over to that building and join the utility engineers here. We are continuing to work on a long-term plan for a facility on Scott Street. And the risk there is that with higher costs and limited budget resources, that is a pretty big lift to try to do that. But it's an important step, really in terms of looking at redevelopment and land use in the city with property that we control. And the West Broadway site is identified as part of our future plans to create some higher and better uses there. So FY23 goals. We're working to build engineering capacity. We're not adding any new FTEs right now, but one of our strategies is to look at how we can add additional engineering capacity through outside funding. So we're looking at how we can use federal funding, federal grants to fund FTEs, as well as fee revenue from things like engineering permit fees that we have to support that work. So some creative approaches there to build our capacity without having to use property taxes. And we'll see those in budget amendments later in the year once we get those lined up. We'll be working to train new staff, particularly around policy and process and software. working to improve our project communication process. This is really something that we've done over the past year and will continue to implement around good awareness of projects, consistency in how we communicate projects, and making sure that our website is up to date and has good information. We're going to work on our financial decision-making metrics. This I think is important with the tight budgets that we're working with to understand the long-term impacts of policy decisions for financial stability. So things like, where do we want to take on annexations? Where do we want to take on maintenance for new roads? And, does the tax base support that when we make those decisions? We're exploring opportunities for infrastructure incentives around affordable housing. And we are working to make sure that we're prepared for emergencies in all of our divisions, looking at emergency response plans. We did this for water in FY22, and we're going to carry that out for the other divisions in FY23. In planning and engineering, this department, one of the things we did this year is we changed the name back to planning and engineering. It had a little bit of an esoteric name of infrastructure and mobility, and we just decided to call it what it does, and that is planning and engineering. So you'll see that name change in the org chart. And this is really about planning and implementing the infrastructure, both private and public, that advances city strategic goals. And this includes an active transportation system that allows residents to safely and conveniently reach destinations by biking, walking, driving, or busing, and also the utility infrastructure that we need to support the built-in natural environment. So a few key metrics. We have 19 different water main and tank projects currently underway, so either in design or construction. We're able to move the needle on our transportation goals around reducing the number of single occupancy vehicle trips. So we had a 5% annual increase over the past 3 years in bike and ped traffic across our primary commuter network. So we're seeing some success in the work we're doing. We also saw an 8% reduction in serious and fatal injury crashes over a 5-year average. We've also worked to support a record number of building permits and a good pipeline of future projects. So our target was to get 600 housing units. I think we're going to be at 11 or 1,200 building permits this year. And we've got about 985 units in the pipeline with new subdivisions. And we're under contract for 1,000 solar panels at the wastewater treatment plant, or the resource recovery plant, to help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from public works facilities. So a couple of highlights to point out here. We did, from the FY22 budget, we got the Higgins Corridor Avenue plan underway and have a preferred option now that's making progress, getting approvals from MDT. We've prepared a transportation options plan. This is a plan that's really targeted around tools and techniques to help reduce our transportation demand. So alternative options for getting around that will reduce the need to provide more transportation infrastructure for cars. And then the last one there, it's on track. We've got $40 million nearly in ARPA grants and state revolving fund loans for utility projects that are now in the pipeline. So a lot of good work there going on in engineering and planning. So some of the things we're going to be working on for FY23, prepare for code reform. This is really important for our department to be plugged into this process. Things like the transportation options plan, our street typology project, these are all going to be really important elements to incorporate into the code reform process. We are working to integrate our engineering plan review and permitting process into our permitting software called Acela. This will really streamline the process, shorten up timelines, and improve efficiency for our staff. We are implementing a development map tool, which will allow us to coordinate multiple developments and decisions around those developments. So we'll have a better idea of how things work together and where key decisions have been made in the past to provide better consistency, make sure that we're carrying out the big picture as well as those individual projects. We're really focusing on federal grants, positioning for opportunities, working with MDT to build capacity to deliver these projects. We're seeing, every month or two, we're seeing a new grant opportunity coming out from the federal infrastructure bill. So we want to be ready for those, and we've got a good staff together working on those grants, getting projects ready to go. And along with that is preparing plans for shovel-ready projects. We need to have projects that are ready, that we've identified the constraints, prepared good cost estimates, and ready to bid and construct projects every year. And as those funding opportunities come up, that'll put us in good position to win those grants. We're working to improve our mapping accuracy and record keeping for the utilities, and continuing to expand our public engagement process and project development process. We've developed a checklist that we'll use for every project that helps our staff identify where the touch points are for public engagement. So we have a few challenges. Obviously, staff capacity to deliver all of this funding and infrastructure needs is still a challenge, and finding those staff and being able to hire them is important. And also inflation and consultant availability is also impacting our ability to perform all of this work. I'm going to hand off to Allison here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison, the Business Finance Manager. I just wanted to quickly thank Jeremy for his guidance during this budget season. As you can see, we have a very complex budget, and hopefully we'll be breaking down each of those pieces here shortly. Also wanted to give a shout out to Finance, who's very patient with us and our ever-changing pieces to our budget, and through this process was fantastic to work with. But just wanted to mention transportation planning did have one new request this year. The new request was for those personnel adjustments around $8,800. This is going to be a shifting number as those have been in flux right now with regards to the non-union pay plan implementation. Just to note that most of the employees in transportation planning are in the planners union, so those adjustments are not shown here. Those are already in their baseline budgets. This request has been approved and funded, as transportation planning is a special revenue fund with most of their majority of their revenue coming from reimbursements by Montana Department of Transportation. So here we have a budget for transportation planning. Like I said, the budget's mainly set on a federal fiscal year since it's grant funded. So most of the 1.7 million is actually reimbursements that we get from the state, and their budget is mainly set through the MPO. The Metropolitan Planning Organization is directing this budget mostly. And we just have a mismatch. The federal fiscal year is different than our current fiscal year. So some of these numbers are, could be in flux if there's any greater need for additional revenue or expenditures throughout the year. Will come through with a budget amendment on that. For revenue, we have other transfers. There are transfers now from Road District for some support of the program. And expenditures, as you can see, we have a majority of the expenditures on personnel. And second to that is grants and contributions, where we are supporting programs throughout the city, and more of a pass-through to support other transportation programs. Next is engineering. So our new request in engineering, we do have our baseline increases that were mentioned both in Eric's presentation as well as Jeremy mentioned these for inflationary costs. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is now that engineering is over here at the water building, we needed to take a look to see at some shared building costs and who is in the building, and to try to make that more equitable. So just water isn't paying for all of the shared services. So we did ask for a request to cover those inflationary and shared building maintenance costs, and that was approved and funded. And as you can see now, as ongoing cost, all of engineering is coming out of Road District 1. And also mentioned the engineering plans examiner and inspector FTE position. We do anticipate needing 2 EPEI positions. One was approved in an FY22 budget amendment, and another one is on request. So we also requested an additional vehicle, so that vehicle would be able to be utilized for both positions, and that the vehicle has been approved and funded, as that can go on a capital lease, so not immediate cost. But we're going to wait to hire the second EPEI position just to ensure that we are seeing the revenue that we're expected to see in this, and to make sure that we do have that capacity for this project. So we will be hopefully coming with that as a future budget amendment. And also the same with the surface engineer, as Jeremy just mentioned. If we're going to have multiple, grant opportunities, hopefully if we can secure a grant that would cover administrative costs, that would cover a position. Once we get that grant secured, we'll be coming forward again with a future budget amendment to secure that FTE.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to streets division, unless anyone has questions on what we've covered so far. Seeing none. Street division is really in charge of ensuring transportation infrastructure is well maintained and safe, and ensuring that these public assets are managed for maximum longevity. Street division milled and paved 3.8 miles of and chip sealed 14.4 miles of city streets in FY22, like 94 miles of street striping. We also perform snow plowing, street sweeping, leaf collection, street pavement maintenance on 284 miles of city streets and 65 miles of alleys. Do 11 city-owned signals and 62 MDT-owned traffic signals. 8,346 potholes this year. We always like to look at that number. Brian's goal is to have that number become 0 before he retires, so we're going to hold him to that. And then we also support police with installation of electronics and safety equipment on police vehicles. And there were 16 of those in the last year. A couple other highlights from FY22. We did 3 RRFB upgrades. These are the rapid flashing beacons. So what we're targeting is replacing the old bouncing ball school crossings with these modern flashing beacons. And we think they're more effective, get better noticed by the drivers. We're working our way through the various school crossings for those. We completed all of our LED streetlight conversions. So all of the city-owned lights are now LEDs, big energy savings there. Carried out the first phase of the radio project upgrade. So this was the part last fall when we purchased all the handsets that allow us to go to digital and different frequency radios. And then this year we're proposing the second phase of that project, which is a lot of the infrastructure on the radio towers and in the county courthouse that helps all of that equipment work. We did major pavement maintenance on 5 different projects: Higgins, Schilling, Alder, Mount, and in the Lincoln Hills. Added bike lanes to projects when we did chip seal work. And we're continuing to work on the sweeper lease. This is a red flag because we had this idea that we could lease sweepers, and it did not pan out. So we've regrouped and trying a different strategy now, but it's becoming a critical need to replace that equipment, which is well beyond its useful life. And we're getting by with good mechanics, but that is going to be an issue in the future if we can't get new sweepers purchased. So goals for FY23, we want to look at increasing our revenue through special projects. So these are the projects that we do for MDT, and also projects that our streets division can carry out that are part of our CIP. And this adds revenue to the streets budget. That's useful for both just building our fund balance and also for covering contingencies, unknowns through the winter. We never know what kind of winter we're going to have and how much it's going to cost for things like de-icer. So this builds a little bit of a contingency for us and is a good way to get some work done. If you've seen the work going on out on Mullen Road this year, streets crews are doing one of the projects on Mullen Road to widen and create the new intersection at Chuckwagon Drive. And that was a CIP project that because of demand for contracting right now, we weren't able to get anybody to bid on it. So streets took it on. We're also working to reevaluate our maintenance priorities based on current budget and staffing. The reality is we're not funding enough maintenance. And I think we need to reevaluate how best to use this funding so that we're continuing to be sustainable in the way that we perform maintenance and understand what kind of level of service we're able to provide. So, we set a goal of keeping all of our streets at a pavement condition of 70, which is kind of that satisfactory condition. That may not be something that we can achieve. And I think we need to be realistic about what actually can get done with the budget that we have. Like I said before, we're also working to establish a road district fund reserve. Road district has had a negative fund balance for a number of years. Last year, we worked our way out of that. And this year we'll have a positive balance. And over the next several years, we'll build a balance for a contingency for equipment purchases that will be about 7% of the fund. So we're targeting about $800,000 as a reserve balance. Continue to make good use of recycled materials, and we're working on new specifications that will allow us to expand that use. This is a huge cost benefit, also has great environmental benefits. Part of that is identifying locations to store that material. As we start to look at the Rogers property over on the north side next to the cemetery for other uses, things like mountain line or future housing, we have to find locations for streets to do their work. And of course, we are going to purchase some new sweepers. So we're hoping to get that figured out this year. So, like I said, some of our challenges are in, maintaining our current level of service with budget constraints, continuing to deal with inflation, a tight labor market, material supply, and those retirement transitions in the street division are also a pretty large concern for us as we go forward.
Jeremy, before you go on, can you just speak to a little bit to the sweeper issue? I've been hearing about that the entire time I've been on council. It's just such a challenge to get new sweepers, but for our air quality in this town, it's a huge issue. And why is it so hard to get the sweepers? What's going on there?
So sweepers are one of the best things we can do for air quality. Our primary air quality problem is dust. It's particulates in the air. And so when we get the streets swept after winter, get all the sand and gravel up off the street, it really helps air quality. The problem is that with using federal money, which is what we've always done to purchase sweepers, there are Buy America requirements. And currently there is nobody that's building street sweepers that meets all of those Buy America requirements. And so we've tried for probably about 4 years now to get a waiver for that. And the lease idea was one way we thought we could get through that waiver process, did not work out. We're back to requesting a waiver, and this has to come from the administration in Washington, D.C. So we're hopeful that we've got that sorted, but we'll see.
Well, and I imagine other municipalities across America are in the same situation as us. I just can't believe, I can't believe something hasn't, either they don't grant waivers or someone hasn't started a business in America to manufacture. I can't believe nothing, because there's got to be all this demand built up, money that's waiting to be spent on it from the feds, and no one can use it. But I guess that's where we're at these days. Huh?
There's a good business opportunity for somebody out there.
All right, messaging it right now. We're going to diversify our businesses here in Missoula. Mirta.
I was going to ask the same thing, but I guess I just wanted a little bit of clarification. The purchase of the sweepers, is that going to be with CMAQ, or is CMAQ still requiring that, is CMAQ allowing now for us to purchase, or are we purchasing with local funds?
We are still hoping to use CMAQ funding. That is the federal funding. And you'll see in our budget here that we have the match for that CMAQ money. Part of it was approved in the previous budget, and there's a new request here for $13,000 to make up that full match. If we're not able to do this with federal money, we may have to retool and figure out a way to purchase them with local money.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Great. Kristen?
Thank you, Jeremy. I think I might already know the answer to this, but one thing I'm really concerned about is trying to alleviate Missoula as just a general heat sink in the summer, and wondering if there, I was just watching this video on YouTube about houselessness and the way the heat affects folks in Phoenix, Arizona, and they're looking at putting a covering over roads that actually helps to reflect the heat. And I'm just wondering, is there anything we can do in that space to try and alleviate heat sinks in the summertime that is not cost prohibitive?
Well, the number one thing we can do is green infrastructure. So the reason we support trees in the right of way is really, it's a big benefit for heat, as well as stormwater. So I think getting green infrastructure in place is really important around that. And then the second thing is when we chip seal, we actually lighten the color of the road. So it goes from that dark black asphalt, which looks really nice when it's new, but it does create a lot of heat. And the chips that we put down are actually quite a bit lighter. And so that helps reflectivity. We'll see what other things could be done. I think that those are two real cost-effective ways that we can help with heat island effect. Yeah. I'm going to go to Allison now, and she'll take us through new requests for street division.
So again, as we mentioned, baseline increases, there has been a noticeable increase in both supplies, services, and building materials through road district. So they're requesting and has been approved and funded for the $218,000. And again, going back to the sweeper lease, this is going to be using funds that were approved for the lease that were unspent for FY22, and hoping to roll those funds and that were previously approved into hopefully purchasing the sweeper through the CMAQ grant. And this is the remainder for what we would need to match the purchase. And for the communication shop and electronics FTE, there is going to be a key retirement here. The work that comes out of the communication shop does require a full FTE for installation of police vehicles and for their communication equipment. And they're struggling to keep up with just the general maintenance of the street works and signals. So if we had another FTE, that would have that knowledge transfer and to create additional capacity. So hopefully, if at some point we can maybe come back for that, but right now this one is not approved and not funded, keeping in alignment with the idea to not add FTEs right now. So on the next slide, we have this is also something that was requested in FY22 that was not approved and not funded. Again, this year, not approved and not funded. As Jeremy alluded to, having trouble keeping up with adequate street maintenance schedules and having to address the growth that we're seeing in the city. And so we're going to have to eventually add some staff and equipment, but right now it's just not financially feasible for the road district to add these 6 FTEs in equipment. So this one, again, is not approved and not funded currently. What is approved and funded are some equipment requests. Traffic Services has inadequate sidewalk snow removal equipment that is actually open to the elements, which makes it difficult to want to clean sidewalks in the winter. So that has been approved and funded and will go on a capital lease through the road district. And a small pickup plow sander will be a one-time cost to the road district, and a a loader mounted snow blower. I think the current snow blower that they're utilizing is from the 60s. So that is definitely in need of replacement, as maintenance on that and replacement parts are getting harder and harder to find. So that is approved and funded, and again, will go on the capital lease. So that's not going to be an immediate cost for road district. Right now, also for this includes all of road district. So road district, when the previous slides were on street maintenance, but road district also includes the administration piece to our budget, as well as engineering piece to our budget, and also all of streets maintenance. So we have some personnel adjustments here that we should see, again, could fluctuate, but around 56,000 that will be approved and funded for FY23. And again, this is the full budget for all of administration, engineering, and streets maintenance. Right now, a majority of the revenue is coming from those property assessments and charges for services. So when we brought, we implemented and integrated engineering permits and charges for services into our road district budget now. So that's something that is new for the licenses and permits in the budget for FY23. And just to note, the other is 13%, and other includes operating transfers. There is a transfer into streets budget from stormwater for the work that they do. There's employee health insurance levy transfers. So that revenue is now fully integrating engineering and streets maintenance budgets as well. And again, on the expenditure side, personnel is a majority of the budget at 58%. And it looks like we do have, so when we did this, we also added the full cost of the capital lease. So this budget isn't a true budget. So that will be phased in through repayment of that. And yeah, and the supplies, again, that does include the requested increase that we have for those baseline increases for supplies.
Okay, we'll pause there to see if there's any questions on engineering, planning, streets before we move on to utilities.
Jeremy, I was just going to note that the Oshkosh snow blower from the 1960s, was it, or is it even earlier, is ancient, and just in terms of climate change, swapping that out is probably good for the city to help greatly with our carbon footprint. So it's expensive, but absolutely necessary at this point.
It has been a great piece of equipment, but it's no doubt a gas hog, and has become very hard to get parts for. And our guys actually fabricate a lot of the replacement parts.
Right, great. Heidi had a question.
So I had a question about the slide you showed a while ago that had the number of miles that were chip sealed. Was that for last year's number of miles?
Yeah, so this was the work that we did in the last fiscal year, was
and
14 miles of streets.
Thanks for pulling it back up. I guess my question is, I think when Mr. Hensel came to us fairly recently, there was some incredible increase in costs associated. I think it was chip sealing, and I was wondering if we can, I guess, predict, do we have an idea if we'll be able to deliver this level of service in the coming year just based on current inflation rates? Or are we just going to see an impact in reduced miles, I guess?
That's a great question. I think we will see a decrease in the number of miles we are able to do in this construction season because of two factors. One, inflation, and the other is just availability of materials. So we were limited in the availability of asphalt this summer, where we could only get it a couple of days a week. And so that's definitely affecting our ability to get these projects done. And of course, chip seal is the cost in chip seal is primarily the oil. And so that's tied to the same, price structures that you see at the pump. So as oil prices go up, we see our costs for chip seal oil go up as well. And that's one of the ones that has increased far greater than the inflation we're even seeing. So, those increases were in the, 30-40% range. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, back to you, Jeremy.
Okay, let's get caught up again here. All right, utility maintenance and operations. So this is our division with stormwater, wastewater, and water. Uh-oh, there it goes, okay. So I'll start with the water utility. Purpose is to protect the health and safety of Missoula community by providing safe, clean drinking water and providing water needed for fire protection and irrigation. We maintain 340 miles of water mains, 40 wells, 25 storage facilities, and 22 booster stations, 36 pressure reducing stations. Produced 9.3 billion gallons of water. Met all of the drinking water standards. We conducted inspections on hydrants and valves. We replaced 2,800 water meters, and we collected over 1,500 back-tee samples from our wells to ensure safe water, in addition to all of the other requirements from the EPA and Department of Environmental Quality. In FY22, we really started to look closer at our leak detection equipment and technology. We invested in new equipment, and we also hired a company to help us do satellite-based leak detection. We've just gotten those results in and starting to evaluate those. We also significantly increased our capital improvement projects in replacements and in new construction through the build project. So we currently have about 7,800 feet of water main in progress, either under construction or in design, and we're constructing 7,200 linear feet of water mains with the build project that will help support new housing and development. We met all of our compliance requirements with no violations in FY22. So as I said, we're going to continue to work on leak detection and repairs. So that's taking this Utilis SARS leak survey data, that's the satellite imagery that we use to find leaks. And then we're also intending to hire a new leak investigation specialist. This is something that it's a new position that we will probably be back to you sometime in the middle of the year to ask for a budget amendment for that. And Allison will talk more about that. We're also anticipating the need to increase our water service line loan fund. As we detect these leaks, some of them are going to be on private service lines, and we want to have a mechanism in place to help folks make those repairs to their service lines when they're leaking. And this is a benefit to our system as well, because we take on additional cost in pumping that water that is then leaking in those lines. And so we think there's good financial benefits for us to incentivize people to replace their service lines. We're also working on completing a service line inventory that's required by EPA to identify any lead service lines. And the data that we have back so far on this looks good, that we don't actually have a lot of lead lines in Missoula. So that's good news. We've got a few isolated places that we run into lead pipe, but primarily that is not an issue for us. We are proposing to upgrade our SCADA control system. This is the computer technology that controls all of the water valves and pumps and wells, and a very important system that ensures the system works well. And we're also looking at the plan to add a well out near the airport that will help provide water for that whole Mullen area as it develops. And the opportunity there is to use Missoula Electric Cooperative's 98% renewable power portfolio. So that's a great opportunity to really shift our carbon footprint and be able to purchase that clean power. And just as perspective, when we buy power from MEC and it's 98% green, that's way better than we can do with solar, because, you know, with the solar projects, we can produce 20 or 30% of our power demand with solar, and we still have to rely on other sources. So being able to buy that green portfolio is really a difference maker.
Mhm.
And we're continuing to work on the Rattlesnake Wilderness dams. This year we plan to decommission the McKinley Lake Wilderness Dam. So that's one of several that we're going to be dealing with over the coming years.
Can you, when you say decommission, Jeremy, can you spell that out? What is that? What's happening?
So the plan with those dams, some of them we're going to retain and hope to operate for late season water flows in Rattlesnake Creek. That requires some upgrades to those dams, but a number of them we've determined the best thing to do is just to decommission the dam. And that basically means lowering the dam to the point where it's no longer considered a high hazard dam and it can function more as a natural lake. So that the lake won't go away, but we'll lower the level of the lake and the requirement to go into the wilderness and maintain a dam. So
Great, thank you.
So a few challenges that we're looking at. Obviously, capital projects are still spending less than what we need to reduce our leakage for our targets. We've made a lot of progress on that, but that program is still not at the full goal that we have. And inflation is really taking a bite out of that. So it's affecting our ability to do as much as we'd like to. And as always, staffing is a big issue. We have a lot of open positions, and we're seeing less applicants for those positions.
So we do have a handful of new requests for the water utility. The first one being that SCADA upgrade that Jeremy has mentioned. So this request would be to contract with HDR to facilitate that upgrade, and also for new server hardware. So it is a capital project that we have in the portfolio. And for the utility locator FTE, so there are state statutes when it comes to locating utilities, and contingent on staff capacity and any revenues that we're seeing from permits. We will be coming back to you with a future budget amendment on this. As you can see, this ongoing cost is coming from road district and not necessarily the water utility. So excavation or permit revenue would come into road district and then be transferred out to water. And this is shared with wastewater, so you'll see it again. So it'll be transferred to the utilities to facilitate that full FTE position that should live in the utilities. And again, with the leak investigation specialist, this position is actually kind of modified to set up for a future retirement, but the retirement timeline is unknown. So we're not actually going to be requesting a full adding an FTE to our roster. It will be kind of like getting rid of the position that is being retired and then adding this one. And we hope that there would be some kind of overlay for that, for some overlap of transfer of knowledge. So we might be coming back to you with a future budget amendment once we know some better timelines on these position shifts in the water utility. So for, again, Jeremy had mentioned the water loan fund increasing. Right now, we're looking to add capacity to that. And I believe Logan's looking at modifying that water loan fund currently, and we'll probably be coming to you to modify that ordinance with regards to how the water loan fund functions. And we would like to have approved and funded the request for $100,000 to transfer from the enterprise fund to the water loan fund to start building that capacity to ensure that there are enough funds for citizens to repair and replace their service lines. For equipment replacement, we do have a couple things here. A tap and gun, the current tap and gun that they have doesn't tap all the taps that they need, like all the sizes. So they're requesting that. And current power pack and pump actually did went out this year. So they're just asking for equipment replacement on a couple of key pieces of equipment that are necessary for operations. And that was $33,000 that is approved and funded. And again, for personnel adjustments, right now. This is much larger than some of the other ones that we've seen so far. However, water is not in a union, so these all include non-union pay plan implementation and also the non-union wage increases. And so those have been fully funded from the Water Enterprise Fund. For revenue, as you can see, charges for services, we have mostly 100% of our revenue is coming from our user rates. And also keep in mind that this also includes a projection. We did have a 5% increase starting January 1. So that is factored into our projections for FY23. And for expenditures, a majority of our expenditures are on debt service. So that debt service does come from acquiring the utility and from that final settlement of the utility, and also on capital projects. So even with that, we are still meeting, as Jeremy mentioned, all of our covenants and requirements for the utility, the financials of the utility. And then we also have personnel is going to be our second largest expenditure for the year for that water utility.
So in wastewater, purpose is to provide safe and environmentally conscious management of disposal of wastewater and collections at the resource recovery facilities. So we really focus on how we recover a lot of those resources, and then making sure that what we discharge to the river is as clean as it can possibly be. Wastewater maintains 28 different lift stations, 1,700 residential and commercial sewer tank pumping systems, those step systems. Treat 2.5 billion gallons of wastewater annually. And so this is an interesting comparison to make. We compare this with the 9 billion gallons of water that we produce, and see 2.5 billion gallons at the plant. So where that goes is irrigation and leakage. So there's a pretty big gap there between what we pump, what we produce, and what we actually see at the plant. And so, we think that probably half of what we're producing in water gets leaked. And of course, there's other losses with irrigation and other uses, but there's a pretty big number there that we're losing.
Jeremy, are you able to look at it seasonally? Because I imagine in the middle of winter, there's no irrigation, and then we got a better read on what the leakage rate at. I assume you've looked at all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The seasonal data is really interesting to look at, because you can see when people turn on irrigation systems and the water use goes up.
Yep.
Whereas leakage likely happens year round.
Got it.
So a couple of highlights from FY22. We completed our compliance inspections from the Department of Environmental Quality and Solid Water Quality and Waste section. Our wastewater folks assisted in preparing the Clark Fork Lane site for the authorized camping, along with Missoula County and Streets Division. Really appreciate their work on that. We saw steady increases with compost revenues again this year. It's been year by year, getting better every year. Those guys are really doing a great job of finding ways to sell the product and finding good customers. We completed the Grant Creek Lift Station project, which eliminated a lift station and created a gravity flow system instead. So that reduces our power consumption and maintenance requirements. As I mentioned, we have the Mullen Build project underway. That's constructing 4,300 feet of sewer mains that will support new growth. And we made it through all of 2021 calendar year without any backups in our gravity mains or step systems. That's got a caution on it, because what we know is that there's risk of those things occurring in the future to a greater extent, because we really have not been able to do a lot of sewer main replacement in our system. And so we know our pipes are getting old, and that may be an anomaly that we get through a whole year without having backups. So for FY23, we want to eliminate the Momot number 2 pump station to save energy. This is similar to the project at Grant Creek that we can convert this to a bypass gravity system and save some energy there. Working to complete some building and mechanical improvements at the resource recovery facility. And we're hoping to have the solar project complete, which will provide 20% of the facility's power. And we're continuing to look at opportunities to save energy by replacing blowers and pumps in the facility. Our target for compost sales is really expanding into the agricultural market. Jason's made some good progress there, and we think there's some good opportunities to continue to grow our sales. And we're really excited to have received an ARPA competitive grant to make facility improvements at compost. So this is a $2.8 million grant that will really move that facility into the modern age and give them some of the things that they need to really run a great operation there. So as I mentioned before, some of the challenges with wastewater, we're still not meeting our revenue targets. The new rate structure that we implemented in FY22 didn't meet the model projections. And so we're continuing to evaluate that. Inflation didn't allow us to catch up as much as we'd hoped. And we think that we may have to come back with another adjustment to rates to make up for that. Like I said before, we're still the lowest in the state, so we're playing catch up a little bit with our wastewater rates, where those didn't move along over time with inflation as much as they probably should have. Inflationary costs with wastewater are also a really big factor in our budget. There's a lot of things that we buy that we don't have a lot of control over, things like fuel and the polymer materials that go into the wastewater treatment. And then we're monitoring closely the new nutrient standard requirements, which could have some effects on our costs in the future with having to upgrade the facility to meet those requirements. So stay tuned. We'll continue to look at the rates and what we need to stay on track later in this year. And finally, I forgot, charting the future of the poplar farm. So that's another big question that we have out there, is how we deal with the poplar trees, what the right product is to grow out there. It's a great benefit to do the land application, but poplar trees are not very marketable. And so we're trying to figure out what the right thing to grow is with that land application of the wastewater, the treated wastewater. So Allison.
Yeah, so those baseline increases, known inflationary adjustments such as polymer, there are contracted rates for electricity and natural gas, which are just going up and increasing per contracts. So we have requested about $305,000, and that has been approved and funded. For overtime, this was a request that we put in for FY22 that was denied at the time. The wastewater utility has done a fantastic job kind of holding the fort and not extraneously spending funds, but it's year over year, the overtime has been over budget, and it's just time to make that adjustment right now. And that is just to ensure effective operations for public health and safety. So that's $49,000 going to overtime that's been approved and funded. And then also annual maintenance contracts. With the transition of the wastewater utility to shared and joint billing, we need to have the wastewater utility responsible for their share of annual maintenance contract of the billing software. And this is also for sewer modeling and to maintain equipment. So just maintenance contracts to cover the utility for $132,000 were approved and funded for FY23. For replacement and depreciation, again, there is a serious overhaul of one piece of equipment, the cogen, and that's to ensure the conversion of biogas to electricity. And that one is going to be a one-time cost, and also loader tires for compost vehicles, again, a one-time cost that are just have been needed. These have been needed and also in FY22 and just kind of have been pushed out to a point where they need to be approved and funded this year. Travel and training. So again, in alignment with the mayor's budget and investing in staff to send people to training is important to ensure we have the best and most up-to-date knowledge about new technologies and in order to most effectively use our systems. This training and travel is for both wastewater direct staff to send them to the Water Environment Federation Conference, as well as a portion of our utility billing staff to further their knowledge in the utility billing software called CIS. So that will allow multiple staff members to attend a training on that system. And that has been approved and funded. And then the hydraulic crane replacement. So the current crane that wastewater utility has will be sold to water to kind of offset this cost. But in the meantime, they are asking for a replacement crane as the current crane is insufficient to pick up some of those larger pumps that they have. So then they have to rent equipment. So if we replace it, then hopefully again, that cost is offset to selling the old one to water. For a copier replacement, the older copier is just past its useful life, and this is just a one-time cost that has been approved and funded for the $5,500. And going back to the water truck is actually a compost water truck that they're asking. Again, going back to dust control, they're requesting to add an additional vehicle to their fleet specifically to manage and mitigate dust control. We kind of put this one on here as a plan. So just putting it out there and noting that it probably will be a request next year as well. This year, this has been not approved and not funded by the utility. Just to kind of bring up that discussion of having this as a necessary piece of equipment to add to their fleet. And this is the second half of the utility locator that was mentioned in the water budget. So that would be a cost share between water and wastewater, but ultimately being paid from road district permit revenue. And hopefully we can come back sometime in FY23 with a budget amendment to bring that FTE on board. So for personnel adjustments, career ladder compensation, non-union pay plan, and non-union wage increases, a large part of wastewater utility is union based, so those are not shown here, but the cost is going to be around $64,000, and that again has been approved and funded for FY23. As you can see, again, revenue mostly coming from charges for services. So 99% of their revenue is coming from rates that they're monthly rates now, monthly. And that does include a current 9% increase that's going to start January 1. That was approved last year. So that already is included in this projection for their revenue. And as you can see, expenditures are higher than their revenue. That is because right now, if we add the capital outlay pieces that we just mentioned that were approved, those are technically one-time costs. And one of them is approved on a capital lease, so it's not a full cost outright. 40% is going to be spent on personnel, but as you can also see, 16% is going to be spent on fixed charges. So fixed charges are what the utility has been paying in admin fees to support their essential services uses. Well, there has been a study that has been completed that we just got results on, I'd say a week ago or a week and a half ago, about how our current central services should be broken out. And with the addition of things like the road district, parts district, and the water utility, it's kind of going to be time to take a look to see how we can implement some changes with our fixed charges. And it looks like we are going to be seeing a shift and a reduction in the fixed charges that wastewater will be hopefully charged this fiscal year. So if there is that reduction, then that will reflect in those expenditures as well.
Okay, moving on to the stormwater utility. Stormwater provides and maintains infrastructure for surface and groundwater to help protect both the aquifers and the rivers. and also make sure that we're in compliance with state, federal, and local laws for stormwater management. And last year, we cleaned 793 dry wells, 103 stormwater inlets. So we have about 5,000 dry well sumps that provide drainage to streets and other areas. So our target is to get to about 1,000 of those every year, or about 20%. So we got to 16% of those, so pretty good. Trying to make sure that we pay attention to all of those, that we get to inspect and or clean those sumps every 5 years. We're struggling with some issues with equipment, with our older vac truck that had some mechanical issues, and so that's slowing down that work a bit. Also did a lot of great work around training contractors and consultants on best management practices, as well as working with our internal staff on good practices. Highlights for 22, completed the Karis Park outfall project. So that was a big high visibility project in Karis Park that we have now complete. The park looks great. Great collaboration with Parks Department to make that a great project and really make an improvement for the quality of the water going back to the river. We're making good progress on our recertification of the levees with the Corps of Engineers, and continuing that outreach, education, internal training that I think is really important in raising awareness for stormwater quality issues. In FY23, we're going to construct the South Hills Stormwater Improvements Project. This was a $2 million ARPA grant that we received. We also received a grant from the DNRC Renewable Resource Program to look at an infrastructure condition assessment. And this is a planning grant that will allow us to better assess what our infrastructure needs are. We are pursuing a grant through the Natural Resource Conservation Service with a multi-agency partnership to improve water quality and fisheries in the Clark Fork River. And this is piggybacking on the work we did with the Flynn Lowney Ditch and creating opportunities to partner with those various agencies. We're also working to address deferred maintenance in the Bitterroot outfall. So this is where all the South Hills storm drainage ends up. And before it gets to the Bitterroot River, we want to make sure that it's getting proper treatment and that outfall is working well. Oops. So the challenges with stormwater are, having the staff capacity. It's a small department to deliver these projects. We do a lot of staff sharing with engineering and support stormwater that way. And then, as I mentioned, delayed equipment replacement is affecting our ability to get some of the maintenance work done.
So for here, baseline adjustments, again, keeping up with inflation, and same with engineering. We're requesting additional funds in the baseline to cover some of those shared building maintenance costs. And that is $5,000, which has been approved and funded. Transfer to wastewater. So wastewater does work in conjunction with stormwater throughout the year, and they did start keeping track of their time. So this is to compensate wastewater staff for their time. And so for $35,000, that has also been added to wastewater revenue, and that is approved and funded as a transfer from stormwater to wastewater. And again, to keep in compliance with the MS4 permit, public outreach, they do a lot of public outreach in the stormwater utility, and they're just asking for $2,500 to cover materials mainly for to perform that outreach. And that's approved and funded as well. And personnel adjustments in the stormwater utility. So the enterprise fund will cover about $31,000 in adjustments for career ladder, non-union pay plan implementation, and non-union wage increases. The budget here, again, mostly charges for service, so 99% is funded through their rates. That does include, again, the 9% increase that's going to start January 1 on top of the increase that they received last year. And then intergovernmental transfers, some of those grants that Jeremy had just mentioned, hopefully we'll see some of that revenue starting in FY23. For expenditures, personnel is about 52% of their budget. There will be some salary savings that are not indicated here, and that will help write the utility. So right now expenditures are about 20,000 above the expected revenue. And once we look at some positions that are currently vacant that don't intended to be filled this year, that will definitely write itself throughout the year. So personnel expenditures will be reduced from what we see in our WDS reports right now.
Okay, that is all of the utilities. That's a lot. So I just wanted to say that we will get these slides posted later today. So you're welcome to reach out to us if you have questions about anything that you heard today.
Great.
We have cemetery and then our capital improvement program to cover yet in this presentation.
I think we've got a little less than 15 minutes, just to let you know. And we
Okay.
still need to do a quick motion then, but go ahead.
We will go quickly then. So city cemetery operates and maintains the city cemetery, provides safe, timely, and respectful interment, and ensures accurate record keeping for historical integrity. It's founded in 1884. So over 21,000 interments, and we performed about 77 interments in FY22. Had our best revenue year that we've ever had, and I think that reflects the attention and public, the welcoming of the public in the cemetery and kind of raising awareness. So we're continuing to work on that. In 22, we continued to implement the strategic plan for the cemetery, including historic designation. We've hired an architect to help us look at office and site needs, and I'm working on creating a GIS database for record keeping and keeping track of all the plots that are at the cemetery. So some of the goals for FY23, continuing to increase the visitation and awareness of the cemetery. We'll work through the architectural plans and work towards identifying funding requests for next fiscal year. So I anticipate that being a bigger fiscal year for cemetery with some of these new capital needs that are coming on. And we're hoping to offset some of that cost with the use and sale of some of the cemetery property, the property that had been purchased for cemetery use many, many years ago and has been determined to not be needed for cemetery use. So good opportunity there. Cemetery is largely supported by general fund, but they do also generate some of their own revenue for services. And those baseline increases for inflation and other costs are included in the budget request. Anything to add here, Allison?
No, cemetery is an easy budget.
Okay, capital improvement plan. I guess we're gonna do this pretty quickly so that we leave some time at the end. But I want to give you a high level overview of what's in the CIP. Go ahead, Allison.
Yep, so we're just going to start with sidewalk and mobility program. And each individual CIP sheet is listed in the FY23 preliminary website. So every single thing on here that's listed on here is also there if you want to refer to those as well. So 11 projects right now. We have a request of about $4 million with 2 that has solidified approved funding. Some of these projects were also carried forward from last year that we're requesting funding again. And some of these we just phased out, like Eaton Street was last year, but we did a phase 1 and a phase 2. And so some of the new phases are new projects or additional projects. So we have 11 projects right now, and with Eaton Street being the one that's currently under construction. And for roadway improvements, again, we have 8 projects. Some of these were also in the FY22 budget request, and some of them also funded. Right now, about $1.5 million in a request with 600,000 approved. And we'll come through with future budget amendments once we secure this additional funding. Some of that is, grants that haven't been secured, or an MRA contract hasn't been, or MOU hasn't been signed yet. So we'll address this throughout the fiscal year. Currently, construction in progress on that Mullen Road reconstruction, as Jeremy had mentioned, and so that was spanning multiple fiscal years as well.
I just want to point out 2 new ones on this list: Scott Street improvements and the Broadway Tool California roundabout. Both, very strategic projects that we've advanced as new CIPs to respond to growth in the Scott Street area and to also help drive the redevelopment of the West Broadway area.
So Wayside Horns, again, not a new project. It's approved and funded in FY22 with an additional request in FY23 to finish that project out. Mullen Build, as we all know, currently under construction and expected remaining budget of $18.6 million. That's all secured and funded, and that has been also approved. And then speaking back to cemetery, that architects services to take a look at their administration building has started, but will flow into FY23. So that's also approved and funded. Wastewater collections. So wastewater will see multiple requests here. So the collections piece right now, we requested $2.8 million with only 150,000 funded. We do have, have been in discussion for many months with the SRF loan on this. And so once we secure that loan and we can attribute it to these projects, we will be coming forward with a budget amendment on these projects. We also intend to use ARPA minimum allocation for Momot 2 and South Russell. So that's about $1 million of ARPA minimum allocation funding going towards wastewater collections in FY23. For Garden City Compost, the largest there, and that's approved, is the $2.8 million for their ARPA minimum allocation and competitive grant for that phase of the reconstruction of that compost facility. And once we secure that SRF loan, we'll come through again with those additional funding requests for their needed equipment replacement. And for wastewater resource recovery facility, this is largely contingent on that SRF loan that we have in progress. So once we have that, we'll be coming through for a budget amendment for the rest of this. The loan itself for wastewater utility right now, I believe, is $4.2 million. So once we secure that, they'll hopefully get more funding in their capital improvement plan. Water system improvements. So we have 15 main replacements and extensions. We have some of these were also approved and funded in FY22. We have fully secured that SRF loan, which went through council a couple months ago. And then we also attributed ARPA minimum allocation and received a competitive grant. So a majority of these projects are fully funded. And again, we have about 5 of those that are construction is currently in progress. So those are, again, spanning multiple fiscal years on these projects. For water production improvements, we have that McKinley Lake dam decommissioning, and the 3 tanks are the projects that we have funded. So once we secure funding, we will come back with a budget amendment for the rest of these projects once they get more solidified. And for the miscellaneous water utility, the majority of this is the meter replacement project. We have secured that SRF loan. We did draw on it for FY22 for meters, and we will continue to do so based on a replacement schedule. So this is all fully funded for the water utility. Switching to stormwater, we have some levee improvements and also stormwater system improvements. Both of these are approved but not funded. We need to ensure that we have adequate sources of debt service on this and to finalize some grants on these. And for also stormwater system improvements, we do have that South Hills Stormwater Improvements Project and the Grant Creek realignment with both live in the stormwater utility. And that's all fully approved and funded, and also in FY22 carrying into FY23 with the funds coming from an ARPA competitive grant, SRF loan, and some of those certificate impact fees on the Grant Creek realignment project. And then we have here the second phase of the radio project. This is going to be addressing those issues that Jeremy had mentioned earlier about the radio signal interference coming from existing infrastructure. That's going to be $1.5 million that is going to be as debt service to our district, and that also has been approved and funded. So this is a look at all of our capital improvement plan revenue. The largest chunk of that is going to be coming from that $13 million build grant, as well as SRF loans. So this year we're looking at utilizing $12 million in SRF loans. We also have a close to $6 million in ARPA competitive grants, as well as $3.8 million in ARPA minimum allocation grant that we've attributed to projects. We have about $6 million left in ARPA minimum allocation grant funding that we're looking at FY24 projects, mainly for wastewater. So we'll be utilizing our full $10 million allocation in the next coming years. And for expenditures, so build being the largest project with Next Wastewater, as they have secured funding and FY22 for most of their projects, and then we have stormwater coming in at 7% with mainly their ARPA funded projects of South Hills and Grant Creek realignment, and wastewater again with 7%, which will increase once we secure that SRF loan for a majority of their projects this year as well.
Just a clarification, water was the second largest.
Water, yes.
38% of the projects are water.
Great. Is that the end of your slideshow?
Yes.
Oh, there you
Thank
go.
you so much for absorbing all of that. And like I said, we're happy to answer questions and follow up
Great.
later if necessary.
We are short on time. So first of all, if we can make sure that all of these PowerPoints are attached to the agenda, that would be great. There's a ton of information in there. We do need to get a motion to get the hearing. And so first of all, if people have follow-up questions, I'd recommend that you email or talk with Public Works people. All right, Mirta.
Be happy to make a recommended motion.
Thank you for that. I will quickly go for public comment. Seeing no one raising their hands, any comment from council on this motion to set the public hearing? All right, seeing none, we'll do a quick roll call vote.
Right. Excuse me. Okay. John Contos.
Yes.
Jordan Hess.
Yes.
Gwen Jones.
Yes.
Kristen Jordan.
Yes.
Mike Nugent.
Yes.
Jennifer Savage.
Yes.
Amber Sherrill.
She had to leave.
She's gone. Okay. Let's see. Heidi West.
Yes.
Mirta Becerra.
Yes.
And Daniel Carlino.
Yes.
So that is 8 yeses.
Great, that can go into the consent agenda, and I'm going to just take one more minute here. I think the issue that was raised earlier in questions regarding structural deficit, a significant potential tax raise this year, how this can be explained so that constituents understand it. I think all of those are really good points, and I'm going to talk with Dale Bickle and other people in the city, and I think maybe in early August or late July, I think we need to have a bit of a presentation on when we say structural deficit, what does that mean in our budget? What are we talking about? This is not just oh, should we or shouldn't we buy another photocopy machine? And it's not because, oh, we tipped up a brand new program and now we have to raise taxes to cover it. When I say structurally, it's systematically, things are not working well to align based on the last 2 or 3 decades of history of how property tax has been altered. And this is now exacerbated by inflation in terms of raising costs. So it's complicated. There's a lot to it, but I think we do need to work on how do we explain that. I've been looking at this for years, so I understand it, but I think we need to look at how to explain that. And Dale, what do you think? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think, one of the oddities, I think, about Montana budgeting is we don't actually know our tax numbers until the first Monday in August when we get those. And once we know what our tax dollars are, we'll be able to give that overview. I think, the mayor's budget introduction and the letter that's available on the website does explain where we're at and what caused it. And we are taking the steps, and you'll see that throughout this budget process, and even in the items that you saw today on things that are not being approved, and the way we're approaching this is how we're trying to resolve these things. But once we get our final numbers from the Department of Revenue, we will come back and do a full presentation on that whole financial condition. It's just right now we're working on estimates. Great.
And thank you. It was explained in the mayor's letter. It's just complicated to wrap your mind around. So I think we're going to need to discuss it more and explain it more and dive into it a little bit more, because once you really start looking at how we're set up to have revenue versus our expenditures, you can start seeing where the gaps are, where the issues are. And so I think we'll get there. We'll get there in August. But all right, thank you, everyone. We ran a little bit late, and we will stand adjourned.
Thank you.